Number 5. The Atlanta Lovers Lane Murders. On January 6, 1977, the Atlanta police were called to a car accident where an out-of-control car collided with a traffic sign. In the car, the police found a man in the front seat and a woman in the back. Both of them were naked and covered in blood. As the paramedics took them to the hospital, they discovered that the couple had been shot multiple times. The man, who was identified as 26-year-old LeBrian Lovett, had been shot twice, while 20-year-old Veronica Hill had been shot 4 times. They both died a short time later in the hospital. The police concluded that the couple was attacked while they were having sex at Adams Park, which wasn't far from the site of the crash. Less than a month later, there was another shooting. On February 12, 1977, at 2:45 a.m., a teenage couple was in a car in West Manor Park, which is about 3 miles from Adams Park. They didn't see anyone approach the car, but someone did and fired 6 shots through the passenger window. Luckily, both of the teenagers survived. The ballistics on the bullets were tested, and they were fired from the same gun that was used in the murder of Lovett and Hill. The teenagers got a look at the shooter, and they described him as a large African-American man. Then, on March 12, 1977, another couple was attacked. 20-year-old Diane Collins was parked in Adams Park with her fiancé when someone fired 6 shots through the passenger window. Collins was killed, but her fiancé survived despite being shot in the head. At this point, a pattern in the killings had emerged. Not only was the killer approaching couples in cars and firing 6 shots into their passenger window, but the dates of the shootings all followed a 4-week schedule. The time between the first and second shootings was 27 days, and is 28 days between the second and third shootings. So the police set up surveillance in secluded areas in and around Adams Park from April 6th to the 8th, which is when the next murder should have happened if the killer was following a pattern. However, the killer never struck again, and the police never caught him. 2 years after the last attack, the Atlanta Police Department announced that they had no leads or suspects, and the case has sat cold ever since. Number 4. The Tube Sock Killings. When 27-year-old Stephen Harkins and his girlfriend, 42-year-old Ruth Cooper, didn't show up for work on August 12, 1985, they were reported missing. The couple, who lived in Tacoma, Washington, had gone camping 2 days earlier in Pierce County, Washington, but they didn't return at the end of the weekend. 4 days later, Harkins' body was found in his sleeping bag in Pierce County. He had been shot in the head while he was sleeping. Nearby, the couple's dog was also found shot to death. Cooper's body was found a few months later in October 1985, not far from Harkins' body. Her skull was found about 50 feet from the rest of her body. Around her neck, the killer had tied a tube sock. 5 months after the murder of Harkins and Cooper, on December 12, 1985, a toddler was found wandering around alone outside of a Kmart in Spanaway, Washington. The girl was put into foster care and her picture was shown on the news. 2 days later, the grandmother recognized the child as the daughter of Mike Reamer, 36, and his girlfriend, Diana Robertson, 21. They were last seen on the day that the girl was found. Reamer was a trapper, and on the day that they went missing, he and his family were going to check some traps that he had set. When the grandmother asked the girl where her parents were, she said, "Mommy is in the trees." However, the police said that the girl was too young to make much sense. The body of Diana Robertson was found 2 months after she went missing, off a logging road near Mineral, Washington, about 30 miles from the Kmart. She had been stabbed 17 times, and just like Ruth Cooper, she had a tube sock tied around her neck. Not far from her body was Reamer's pickup truck. Under one of the windshield wipers was a manila envelope that had "I love you, Diana" written on the outside of it. When Reamer's body wasn't found, the police thought that he could have murdered his girlfriend, along with Ruth Cooper and Stephen Harkins, and then disappeared. However, that all changed in March 2011, 25 years after the discovery of Diana Robertson's body, when Reamer's skull was found within a mile of where her body was found. The only thing that the medical examiner could determine was that Reamer didn't die from a gunshot wound to the head. After finding the skull, the police do not think that Reamer was the killer. Instead, he was a victim of the serial killer who murdered his girlfriend, Harkins, and Cooper. However, since Reamer was the police's leading suspect and he has been dead this whole time, it leaves them without a suspect, and the case of the tube sock killings is currently cold. Number 3. The Colonial Parkway Murders. The Colonial Parkway in Virginia connects the cities of Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, and between 1986 and 1989, it was also the hunting ground of a vicious serial killer. On October 12, 1986, a jogger on the Parkway noticed that a car had been driven down an embankment. In the backseat of the car was a lesbian couple, 27-year-old Kathleen Thomas and 21-year-old Rebecca Ann Dowski. The couple was known to go to a secluded area off the Parkway to have sex. Their wrists had been bound, there were signs of strangulation, and their throats had been slit. Their bodies were also covered in diesel fuel, and there were a few used matches at the scene. It's believed that the killer tried to set the bodies on fire inside the car, but couldn't get a fire going. Instead, he, or she, just pushed the car down the embankment. The next set of murders happened 11 months later on September 21st, 1987. 20-year-old David Lee Nobling's pickup truck was found abandoned not far from the Parkway, with the driver's side window rolled down halfway. Inside the truck were a pair of shoes that belonged to 14-year-old Robin Edwards. Days later, their bodies washed up on the shore of James River, about 2 miles away from the truck. One thing that the investigators did note about the truck was that it was raining on the night that Nobling and Edwards went missing, so the windows on the truck would have probably been rolled up. This led to speculation that someone knocked on Nobling's window, so he rolled the window down halfway, and then the killer ordered the couple out of the truck. The killer then led the couple through the woods for 1.5 miles to the river, where they were shot in the back of the head and then dumped in the river. Then, on the morning of April 10th, 1988, 20-year-old Richard Keith Call's car was found with the driver's door open off of the Parkway. In the backseat were clothes that belonged to Call and 18-year-old Cassandra Haley. They were university students and had met at a party the night before. Their bodies have never been found, but both are presumed dead. The final set of murders unfolded on September 5th, 1989, when 18-year-old Anne Maria Phelps was traveling with 21-year-old Daniel Lauer, who was the brother of her fiancé. They were last seen around noon, but then later that day at about 5:30 p.m., Lauer's car was found at a rest stop on Interstate 64, not far from the Parkway. There were no signs of a struggle, but the keys were in the ignition, the gas tank was 3/4 full, and Phelps' purse was in the car. Their decomposing bodies were found 6 weeks later by hunters less than a mile from the rest stop. Phelps had been stabbed to death, but Lauer's body was too badly decomposed to determine the cause of death. One theory regarding the identity of the killer is that he, or she, was a security guard, or someone working in law enforcement, or someone pretending to be a law enforcement agent. This is because at all 4 crime scenes there were no signs of a struggle, so the theory is that the killer found the couples parked, knocked on their windows, and had them step out of their vehicles. People would probably only do something like that when they are being confronted by someone like a police officer. However, this is only speculation, and the identity of the Colonial Parkway killer is still a mystery. Number 2. The Psychopath. Starting in 1986, an area south of Costa Rica's capital, San Jose, became the killing grounds of a serial killer, only known as the Psychopath. The area where the Psychopath did his killings was called the Triangle of Death by the locals. The police think that the killer got his start in an incredibly brutal fashion by massacring 7 members of a family. On April 6, 1986, just south of San Jose, 7 bodies were found in 2 ditches. The bodies were a 41-year-old woman, her 3 daughters, and her 3 nieces, who ranged in age from 4 to 16. The massacre happened in the Triangle of Death, and they all had been shot execution style. After that, the Psychopath started going after couples. He would stalk a couple for several days and would learn where they go to park their car for privacy. He would then go to the victim's favorite secluded area where he would set up and wait for them. Once they started having sex, he would ambush them with what was believed to be an M3 submachine gun. Afterwards, he used a sharp knife to cut off the nipples of his female victims along with pieces of their genitals. The criminal profile on the Psychopath suggested that he kept them as trophies. After attacking 2 couples, the killer changed his strategy. On July 14, 1987, the Psychopath sat in a coffee bean field and watched a 24-year-old woman through a window as she read in her bedroom. He then fired 1 shot, and it hit the woman in the left temple. After shooting the young woman, the Psychopath went and knocked on the door of her apartment and told her parents that he was the police. It is presumed that he wanted to get into the apartment to kill the parents and violate the dead body of the woman he just shot. However, the parents didn't let him in and he left. When the Psychopath started his killing spree, he would murder a couple under a full moon every other month. But then in 1989, he went on a hiatus, which would last 6 years. He would return in 1995, just weeks after a man who had been wrongly accused of committing the massacre of the family was shot by someone on a white motorcycle. The bullet was a .45 caliber, which is the same caliber of ammunition used in the Psychopath killings. However, the police don't think that the shooter was the Psychopath, but the murder seemed to have made him stir. Just weeks later, he shot a woman while she was walking home from a party. She would survive long enough to give a description of the Psychopath to the police. The Psychopath would strike again once more before going dormant again. It was another couple, and they were killed in April 1996. Over the course of a decade, the psychopath claimed the lives of at least 19 people, which includes 5 couples. However, the police believe that the real number of victims could be over 30. Unfortunately, the statute of limitation on the murders has run out, so even if the psychopath was identified, he will most likely never be prosecuted for the killings. Number 1. The Monster of Florence. On the night of August 21st, 1968, 32-year-old Barbara Locci and her son went to see a movie with Antonio Lobianco, who was not her husband, but was one of several men that she was having an affair with. After the movie, the couple was in Lobianco's car. When Locci's son fell asleep in the back seat, they tried to take advantage of the privacy and started to undress. Suddenly, 8 bullets were fired into the car, killing Locci and Lobianco. The killer then drove Locci's son 95 miles away and dropped him off unharmed at a farmhouse in the country. Locci's husband was arrested for the murder and he confessed. Despite many holes in his confession, he was convicted and ultimately sentenced to 14 years in prison. But then, 6 years later, there was another murder. 19-year-old Pasquale Gentilcore and 18-year-old Stefania Pettini were partially undressed in a car when someone fired 10 bullets at them. Gentilcore was killed when he was hit 5 times. Pettini wasn't as lucky. She was shot twice and then dragged from the car and stabbed 97 times, leaving an odd pattern on her chest. After she was dead, she was sexually mutilated with a grapevine. It would be 7 years before the monster re-emerged again. This time the victims were 30-year-old Giovanni Foggia and 21-year-old Carmelo Danuccio, who were set to be married. They were found shot to death in their car in June 1981. 8 bullets were fired and the shots killed both of them. After the shooting, Danuccio's body was pulled from the car and the killer stabbed her 300 times. Finally, he cut out her genitals and took it with him. The people of Florence may have been hoping that the killer would take another break for several years, which would give the police time to search for him. Instead, the monster had other plans. He struck again 4 months later in October 1981. Another couple was shot and stabbed to death, and again, the pubic region of the woman was gone. The next set of murders were committed in June 1982, when another couple was stabbed and shot, but this time the female wasn't mutilated. The next killings happened in September 1983, when 2 German students traveling in Italy were shot. During this murder, the monster made a mistake because both students were male. He may have mistaken one of them for a woman because one of the victims had long blonde hair. In July 1984, another couple in Florence were murdered while in their car. This time the woman was stabbed over 100 times, and again the genitals were cut out and missing. The final set of murders happened in September 1985. The victims were 2 French tourists who were attacked in their tent. This time the monster took part of the woman's left breast, along with her vagina. Several days after the murders, the prosecutors got a package, and it was a piece of the victim's breast wrapped in newspaper. After that, the couple's slayings, which all happened on moonless nights between 10 and midnight, mysteriously came to an end. The police continued to investigate the murders all the way into the 90s, and it led them to Pietro Petroni, who had spent 13 years in prison for murdering a traveling salesman that he caught in bed with his wife. He also had been back to prison for beating his wife and sexually abusing his 2 daughters. He was arrested and then convicted in November 1994 for 14 of the 16 murders. However, the convictions were overturned 2 years later due to a lack of evidence. When they were overturned, the police had a new theory. They said that Petroni was the leader of a gang that comprised of 3 other men, and they were responsible for the murders. When the 4 gang members went to trial in 1998, Petroni, who was 73, died from natural causes a day before closing arguments. Out of the 3 remaining gang members, 1 was acquitted and 2 were convicted of participating in some of the murders. Both of them ended up dying in prison. The convictions were mocked in the press, and many people do not believe that the men were involved in the 16 murders that spanned 3 decades. In fact, in 2006, the police accused another man of being the leader of the gang, which they said was actually a satanic cult. They also accused a journalist who had covered the case and was critical of the police of being a cult member as well. The prosecutor's office spent 3 years building a case against the 2 men, but they didn't have any real evidence. Ultimately, in 2010, the prosecutors were convicted of abuse of power for pursuing the case. At the time of their convictions, one of the prosecutors was prosecuting Amanda Knox for the murder of her roommate. As for who really is the Monster of Florence, there are several theories, but at the time of this video, the case is unresolved. Thanks for watching this week's video. Please let us know what you thought of it in the comments section. If you liked it, please subscribe. We post a new video every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thanks to everyone who has already subscribed. Finally, if you want to check out another video about unsolved serial killers, please check out one of the videos on the screen now. And thanks again for watching.